They once helped humans. Repayment changed their destiny forever. The war map did not lie. Rail had looked at it for a long time, standing alone in the archive room beneath the council hall. The red zones had grown again since yesterday. 2 more outer colonies gone. The Droon moved slowly, but they never stopped. They never turned back. They did not negotiate. They did not warn. They simply arrived, and then what was there before was gone. He was old. His dark exoskeleton carried the marks of many years, small cracks near his shoulder joints, the silver patterns along his arms grown pale. His amber eyes were tired. He had sat in the council hall for 40 years and watched the Vareth build their trading empire across 40 systems. He had signed contracts with a dozen species. He had never once asked anyone for anything. That was the Vareth way. You did not ask, you offered, you traded. You took what was fair and you left. He turned away from the war map and walked deeper into the archive. The old records were stored here, not in the main system, but in physical data plates stacked in narrow shelves along the stone walls. The room smelled of age and dust. Nobody came here anymore. There was no reason to. He was not sure what he was looking for until he found it. The plate was thin and marked with a date that was more than 200 years old. He held it under the reading light and the information came up slowly. Old Navigator Guild contracts, route licenses, payment records, coordinates for places that no longer had the same names. And there, buried in the middle of the 3rd page, a list of client species for the outer corridor routes. Humans, 17 contracts across 40 years, colony ships, cargo ships, passenger vessels, all guided through the rift corridors by Vareth Navigator Guilds, all paid, all delivered safely. Rail put the plate down. He stood there for a while. Then he picked it up again. The council meeting the next morning was not going well. It had not been going well for 3 weeks. The same arguments came around in circles, call the Thanari, call the Solvek, call the Marin Collective. Every time someone would report that the message had been sent. Every time the answer was the same: regrets, complications, other commitments. The Droon were patient. Everyone else knew it. Nobody wanted to be standing next to the Vareth when the Droon finally arrived. Dara sat near the back of the chamber. She was young for a council seat, barely 40 years in service, and the older members did not look at her often. She had a data slate on her knee, and she had been reading from it quietly while the arguments went around the room again. She waited until there was a pause, then she stood. "There is one name we have not said." Nobody responded. She continued. "Humans, we guided their first colony ships through the rift corridors. 17 contracts, 40 years of work. We were paid, yes, but without us half their early colonies would not exist. Their trade routes through the outer systems use paths we mapped. Their navigators still use course corrections that our guild documented 2 centuries ago." She held up the data plate that Rail had placed on the table that morning. "They owe us nothing legally, but they remember. Humans always remember." Elder Rail, sitting at the center podium, said nothing. Another council member spoke. "We are the Vareth. We do not go to other species with our hands open." Dara looked at him steadily. "We will not have hands at all if the Droon reach the home system. We have 6 weeks of military capacity remaining. 6 weeks. After that, we are asking the Droon for mercy, and we all know exactly what that looks like." Silence. She did not push further. She sat down. Rail found her afterward in the corridor outside the hall. He did not say anything immediately. He walked beside her for a moment, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes on the floor. "If we go to them," he said at last, "and they say no, we will have shown every species in the galaxy that the Vareth begged and were refused." "If we do not go to them," Dara said, "there will be no Vareth left to feel embarrassed." He stopped walking. She stopped too. He looked at her for a long time. His amber eyes were hard to read, they always were, but something behind them was shifting. Some wall that had been there a very long time was developing a crack. You would go, he said. Yes. Alone. Yes. He looked down at the data plate still in her hand. The old contracts, the old routes, 200 years of history pressed into a thin piece of material that nobody had looked at in decades. They may laugh at you, he said. They may, she agreed, but they will listen first. Humans always listen first. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, take the full archive, every contract, every route map, every communication record, show them everything. She nodded. He turned and walked back toward the council hall. He did not say good luck. The Vareth did not say things like that, but at the door he stopped with his back to her. Dara. Yes. Do not apologize. Do not beg, just tell them the truth. She watched him go inside. Then she walked in the other direction, toward the launch platform, toward her ship, toward human space. The city glowed teal behind her in the evening dark. She did not look back. The waiting room had no windows. That was the first thing Dara noticed when the human guards brought her in. Not a viewport, not a screen showing the outside. Just 4 pale walls, gray chairs bolted to the floor, and a single overhead light that did not flicker or change. It was the kind of room designed to make a visitor feel like they had been forgotten. She sat in one of the chairs and put her data case on her knees and waited. The first day passed. A human in a plain uniform brought her food, something warm in a sealed container that smelled of salt and grain. She ate it carefully and set the container aside. A second human brought water. Neither of them spoke to her. Neither of them looked at her for more than a moment. The second day, she asked the guard at the door how long she would be waiting. He said he did not know. His face said he did know but had been told to say otherwise. The third morning, a different officer came. Older, straight posture. He told her without expression that the Council of Admirals would see her now. Dara stood, picked up her case and followed him. The chamber was large and deliberately cold. A long table ran down the center of the room. At the far end sat Admiral Brock Hale, heavy-set, gray-haired, dark skin, the kind of face that had been in difficult rooms for a long time and had stopped being surprised by them. Around him sat 8 other officers, all in dark uniforms, all watching her with different versions of the same expression. On Hale's right sat General Civ Oren, arms already crossed, eyes already hard. Dara walked to the near end of the table. She did not sit. She had not been invited to. She opened her case and placed the archive plate on the table. My name is Dara. I represent the Vareth High Council. I am here because my people are going to be destroyed, and I believe you are the only ones in this galaxy who will not turn away from that. She activated the plate. The holographic display came up above the table, old navigator logs, route maps, the 17 contracts, coordinates, dates, names of human colony ships going back 230 years. The Droon have taken 4 of our systems in 8 months. We have perhaps 6 weeks of effective military capacity remaining. 3 allied species have declined to assist us. I'm not here to negotiate trade rights or territorial agreements. She looked directly at Hale. I am here because your first 11 colony ships survived the rift corridors because Vareth Navigator Guilds led them through. I am here because those ships became the foundation of your outer settlements. I am here because without that passage, your species would have lost decades of expansion and thousands of lives. Silence. General Oren spoke first. His voice was flat and direct. The Vareth charged fees for those services, fair market rates. Nobody gave humanity a gift. Your navigator guilds were paid. Every contract on that table has a payment record attached to it. He leaned forward slightly. Why should human soldiers die for a business relationship that ended 2 centuries ago? Dara had prepared for this. She had an answer, a careful, diplomatic answer that laid out long-term strategic value and mutual benefit across the outer systems. She did not use it. She looked at Oren, then at Hale, then at the rest of the table. "You are right," she said. "It was business. We did not do it for your people, we did it for the money. We did not care about your colonies or your families on those ships. We guided them safely because that was the service we were selling." She paused. "But those families lived. Those colonies grew. Those children were born because the ships arrived. We did not intend to give you a gift, but that is what it became." Her voice stayed steady. "My people will be gone, every single one of us. I'm not asking you to honor a contract. I am asking you not to let an entire people disappear from the galaxy, while you had the power to stop it and chose not to." Nobody spoke. Hale said, "Meeting adjourned. We will contact you in the morning." The guards walked her back to the waiting room with no windows. That night Hale sat alone in his quarters with a single light on. He pulled up the old archive files, not the ones Dara had brought, but the ones in the human historical database. Passenger manifests, colony ship logs, distress calls from the rift corridors that never had to be answered because a Vareth navigator vessel was already there ahead of the danger. There was a name in the manifest of the third ship, Hale R. his grandmother, age 7, colony destination, Outer Reach Station 4. He sat with that for a long time. He did not make his decision because of it. He told himself that honestly and believed it. He made his decision because it was right, and because humanity had the power to act, and power without use was just weight. But he sat with it a little longer before he closed the file. In the morning he sent word to the waiting room. The council would reconvene. Dara should bring her full archive. There were terms to discuss. Nobody expected Elder Rail to be there. He had traveled without announcement, on a small unmarked vessel, arriving at the neutral station 6 hours before the second meeting. Dara found him waiting outside the negotiation room in a plain corridor, his ceremonial robe still carrying the dust of travel, his amber eyes giving nothing away. "You came," she said. "I came," he confirmed, as if that was all that needed to be said. She had wanted to ask him why. She had wanted to ask if the council knew. She said neither thing. She simply walked with him into the room. The negotiation room was round. That had been the human's idea. No head of the table, no position of power. Hale had chosen the setup himself, and when Dara saw it, she understood that Admiral Brock Hale was not a simple man. He was already seated when they entered. Beside him sat one aide who took notes and did not speak. That was all. No row of officers, no General Oren, just Hale and an empty chair across from him. Rail sat in it. The two of them looked at each other. An elderly, insect-like being in teal and gold robes, and a heavy-set human man in a plain Navy uniform. Both old, both carrying the weight of their peoples behind their eyes. Hale spoke first. "I'm glad you came yourself." Rail said nothing. He was listening. "I'll be direct," Hale continued. "I'm going to recommend to the Council that we commit fleet assets to your defense. Minimum 2 carrier groups with ground support if the situation requires it. We will engage the Droon and we will do it fully, not symbolically." He paused. "But I want something in return, and it's not what you're expecting." Rail's hands were flat on the table. "Say it." "I want the full historical archives. Every Navigator Guild log, every route map, every record of contact between Vareth ships and human vessels going back to the first contracts. I want them transferred to the Human Historical Institute and made permanently accessible. Public record. Not a political document. Not propaganda. Just the truth of what happened and when." The room was quiet. Dara watched Rail's face, or what served as his face, the compound eyes, the slight movement of the mandibles, the posture of his neck and shoulders that she had learned to read over many years of working beside him. He had not expected this. She had not expected it either. Hale kept talking. "You helped us 200 years ago. Whether it was business or not, it was real, it happened. and your people should be part of our history the way you actually are, not forgotten because the contract's expired. When this is over, I want a generation of humans to grow up knowing that Vareth navigators lit the path through the rift corridors. Not because it makes you look good or makes us look grateful, because it's true. Rail was still for a long time. Then he said you could have asked for systems, mineral rights, trade concessions, things with value. This has value, Hale said simply. Another silence. The council will say I gave away our history, Rail said. Your history isn't going anywhere. I'm asking you to share it. There's a difference. Rail looked down at the table. His thin, dark fingers spread slightly, then folded together again. Dara recognized the gesture. She had seen it once before, years ago, when he had made a decision he knew would cost him something but had made it anyway. Agreed, he said. Hale nodded once, reached across the table and placed his open palm flat on the surface. It was not a handshake. They both knew the anatomy did not work that way. But it was a gesture. Rail looked at the open hand for a moment, then placed his own equivalent flat beside it. Two palms on a table in a round room with no head position, on a neutral station in the space between their peoples. Dara wrote nothing on her data slate. She just watched. Captain Nora Vance was introduced to her in the corridor afterward. She was lean and precise, dark hair pulled back tight, green eyes that moved quickly and missed nothing. She shook Dara's hand in the human way. Dara had practiced this, and held it briefly and firmly. I've been assigned to lead the operation, Vance said. I've read your archive files, all of them. A pause. Your navigator guilds were very good. They were the best in the outer systems, Dara said. Vance almost smiled. Not quite. We'll get your people home. It was a short exchange. Less than 2 minutes. But Dara found herself standing in the corridor after Vance had gone and feeling something she could not immediately name. It took her a moment to identify it. It was the feeling of being believed. Not the formal belief of a signed agreement. Not the careful belief of diplomacy. The simple, direct, personal belief of one person looking at another and saying, I will do what I said. She had not known how much she needed that until it happened. Outside, through the station's narrow corridor viewports, the human fleet was already forming up. The unyielding sat at the head of the formation, gray and heavy, and completely without decoration, like something built by people who had decided long ago that what mattered was what a thing could do, not what it looked like. Dara watched it for a while. Then she went to find her assigned quarters on the ship, because Vance had already arranged them, because that was apparently the kind of person she was. The Droon had been at this for 8 months, and they had never once been surprised. That was the part that disturbed Rail most, watching from the Vareth command ship as the situation reports came in. The Droon did not react to unexpected developments because they did not allow unexpected developments. Their fleet moved in precise grids. Their timing was exact. Every engagement followed a pattern, probed the edges, identify the weak point, apply sustained pressure until the structure failed. It was not brilliant strategy. It was patience made into a weapon. Rail had been watching them long enough to know that the Vareth could not fight this way. The Vareth were traders and navigators. Their military had been built to protect shipping lanes, not to absorb a sustained campaign by a species that treated war as arithmetic. Then the human fleet arrived. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a tight formation that immediately began to change. Not randomly, but in a way that Rail's tactical officers could not immediately categorize. The ships spread apart at angles that did not match standard engagement doctrine. They left gaps that looked like weaknesses but closed too quickly to exploit. "What are they doing?" one of his officers asked. Rail did not answer. He was watching. Captain Nora Vance, on the bridge of the Unyielding, did not spend time studying the Droon formation before she moved. She had studied it for 3 days in transit. She knew exactly what it was, a calculated wall, designed to hold a line and grind down anything that pushed against the edges. So she did not push against the edges. She took the unyielding directly into the center. Rail's officers made sounds of alarm. One of them said that the human commander had either made a catastrophic error or had lost her mind. Rail said nothing. He pressed his hands flat on the display console and watched. The unyielding hit the center of the Droon formation like something that had decided to stop caring about the outcome. Its hull plating lit up with impacts. Whole sections of the outer armor scorched and cracked. It did not slow. It did not turn. It continued forward, and it began to fire in all directions, not at specific targets, but at the spaces between Droon ships, at the connections between their grid positions, at the coordination itself. The other human ships were already moving through the gaps created by the chaos. The Droon had never faced an opponent who used their own formation against them. A grid is strong when everyone holds their position. When one part of the grid is forced to respond to something impossible and moves out of position, the neighboring parts must compensate. The compensation creates new gaps. The new gaps are immediately filled by the humans, who seem to have been waiting for exactly this, because they were. Within 11 minutes, the Droon formation fractured. Within 22 minutes, their command signals, those slow bioluminescent pulses that coordinated their entire fleet, were too disrupted to organize a response. Within 40 minutes, the Droon were withdrawing. Rail stood at his viewport in absolute silence. His officers were talking. He did not hear them. He was watching the unyielding hold its position in the space where the center of the Droon formation used to be, its hull burned and battered and missing plates in 3 sections, its amber running lights still on, still steady. It looked like something that had gone into a fire and come back out the other side because it had simply decided to. Behind him, he heard a sound he had not expected. He turned. Dara was standing at the secondary viewport with her arms at her sides. Tears were running silently down her face, real tears. The kind the Varath showed only in private, in grief, in moments too large for composure. She did not wipe them. She kept watching the battered human warship through the viewport. Rail looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the unyielding. He was not sure what he was feeling. It was not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was simple, and this was not simple. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you realize you have spent a long time being wrong about something important. He had spent 200 years thinking of humans as clients, transactions, species that needed guidance and paid for it and moved on. What he was watching was not a transaction. A transaction ended when the payment cleared. What he was watching was something that had started in a round room on a neutral station and had become this. A human ship absorbing punishment it did not have to absorb, holding a position it did not have to hold, for a people it had no obligation to protect. He thought about the old Navigator Guild records, 17 contracts, 40 years. He had read them as business history. He was beginning to understand they were something else. The communication channel opened. Captain Vance's voice came through, steady, a little tired, completely matter-of-fact. "Rail, your outer system lane is clear. We took some damage, nothing that stops us. What's next?" Not a question, a statement. Rail straightened. His old back ached from hours of standing, but he straightened fully, the way he had not in weeks. "Next," he said, "we hold what we have, and we plan for Surath." "Understood," Vance said. The channel closed. Dara had wiped her face. She was looking at him now, composed again, slate in hand. "She did not ask if we were grateful," Dara said quietly. "No," Rail said, "she did not." He thought about why that was and what it meant, and found he did not have the words for it yet. But he thought he was beginning to. Yun had never stood next to a human before. He had seen them on screens and in briefing images. He had read the tactical summaries. He knew they were smaller than Varath on average, that they had soft outer skin with no natural armor, that they needed more water than most species, that they were, by almost every biological measure, fragile. He watched one of them lift a supply crate that should have required 2 people and carry it alone across the trench, set it down, and immediately start joking with the soldier beside him. The joke involved sounds Yun could not translate, but the other human laughed and hit the first one's shoulder with an open hand, which seemed to be a positive gesture. Yun did not understand. The Droon ground forces were 40 minutes out. Their transport columns had been tracked descending through Sureth's atmosphere for the past 3 hours, 12,000 soldiers. The colony below them held 800,000 Vareth civilians. The combined defense force, 2,000 Vareth infantry and 1 battalion of human marines, was dug into a trench line on the colony's northern plain. The math was not good. Yun's squad leader, an older Vareth named Shet, had looked at the numbers and said nothing. That was how Vareth soldiers communicated despair, by becoming very quiet. The humans were not quiet. They were checking equipment and talking, and 2 of them were passing a container of something hot back and forth, and apparently arguing about the flavor. One human marine, shorter than the others with wide shoulders and a helmet that sat slightly crooked, was teaching a Vareth soldier a hand signal that seemed to mean, "I am behind this wall and alive." A communication tool apparently improvised on the spot, because their translators did not cover every situation. The improvisation bothered Yun less than he expected. It bothered him that it did not bother him. The assault began at the 2nd hour mark. Droon ground soldiers moved in their characteristic way, tight rows, regular spacing, bioluminescent coordination pulses flickering between them like a nervous system visible from outside the body. They covered ground at a steady pace, and they did not rush and they did not slow. They simply came. The first exchange was brutal and loud. Yun had been in 2 previous engagements with Droon forces, and he knew how to move, where to shelter, how to read the rhythm of their advance. What he did not know how to read was the humans fighting beside him. They did not stay in position. Every Vareth tactical doctrine said, "Hold the line, maintain your gap spacing, do not break position." The humans did something else. They shifted, constantly. One would pull back while 2 moved forward. One would go left while another went right. They moved in small patterns that somehow kept them covered and kept pressure on the Droon at the same time. And they talked the whole time, short words, hand signals, sometimes just a tap on a shoulder. And their movements fit together in a way that should not have worked without more planning. Yun was covering a break in the trench when the section to his left collapsed under a Droon push. He was cut off. He took a hit on his left shoulder joint, not a killing blow, but his arm went mostly numb, and he could not bring his weapon up properly. He pressed against the broken trench wall, and his options went to 0 very quickly. Something grabbed the back of his armor and pulled. Hard, fast, no warning. He was dragged backward through a gap he had not seen, into a covered section of the trench, and the human marine with the crooked helmet dropped down beside him and immediately started firing back through the gap. It lasted about 40 seconds. Then the gap was closed by 2 other marines and the Droon push stalled. The marine looked at Yun, said something short. Yun's translator gave him, "You good?" He was not sure what the right answer was. His arm did not work properly and his heart was moving very fast. He said yes, because it was simpler. The marine nodded and moved back to his position. Later, when the Droon ground force had broken and the plain was quiet and the fires in the distance were the only light, Yun found the same marine sitting near a low fire eating from a ration pack. He sat down nearby. The marine looked over at him, then held out a second pack. Yun took it. He held it for a moment. "Why did you come for me?" he said. His translator worked it into the basic human trade language they had been using all day. The marine thought about this for a moment, not a long moment. "You were on our side," he said. Yun waited for more. There was no more. He looked at the ration pack in his hands. He looked at the fire. Around it, humans and Vareth sat together in the particular exhausted quiet of people who had been afraid at the same time in the same place and had come through it. Nobody was giving speeches. Nobody was talking about alliance or history or debt. One human was asleep sitting up. One Vareth was cleaning his weapon slowly. Two others were looking at the moons. Yun opened the ration pack. He did not know what was in it. He ate it anyway. Then he took out his communicator and wrote a message to Rail. He wrote it 3 times before he found the right words. It said, "I think what we owe them is not what I thought it was. I will explain when I see you." He sent it. He looked at the moons. The fire was warm. The Droon made their last calculation carefully. They had lost 2 engagements. Their ground offensive had failed. Their outer fleet units were scattered. By any reasonable measurement, the campaign was finished and withdrawal was the correct answer. But they had 1 move left, and it was logical. The Vareth homeworld was lightly defended. The human fleet was positioned near Surath, 2 systems away. If the Droon command fleet moved directly for the homeworld, the humans would face a choice. Commit to a full pursuit engagement across 2 systems and risk being caught between the command fleet and reforming Droon rear units, or hold position and watch the Vareth homeworld fall. It was a good calculation, clean, defensible, based on the assumption that humans would not spend themselves for someone else's survival when their own forces were intact and their own territory was safe. It was also wrong. Hale got the Droon fleet trajectory report at the same time Rail did. Rail sent a communication immediately. He expected to find Hale already in the process of deciding whether to act. Instead, he found Hale already in the process of moving. "We saw it 4 hours ago," Hale said on the open channel. His face on the display was tired and completely settled. "We're already on intercept course. Should reach engagement range before the Droon command fleet reaches your home system." Rail was quiet for a moment. "You did not contact me first," he said. "Didn't need to. We said we'd see this through. That hasn't changed." Hale looked at something off-screen and then back. "How are your home defense forces positioned?" They worked out the details in 12 minutes. Rail's home defense fleet would hold the inner perimeter. The humans would hit the Droon command fleet from behind while it was still in transit. The Droon would be caught moving, not set, which was the worst position for a formation built around grid discipline. When the channel closed, Rail stayed at his viewport for a long time. He thought about a thing that Yun had written in that short message from Surath. "I think what we owe them is not what I thought it was." He had read it 3 times and not fully understood it. He thought he was beginning to understand it now. The debt he had been thinking about for weeks was a ledger item, something that could be balanced. 200 years ago the Vareth helped humans, and now the humans helped the Vareth, and the account was cleared and both sides walked away. But that was not what was happening. What was happening was that Hale had not contacted him before moving because Hale had made a promise and the promise did not require checking. It was already done. It had been done in that round room on the neutral station, and it had been done every hour since, and it did not need to be renewed because it had never been a calculation. It had been a decision. The final battle was not short, and it was not clean. The human fleet caught the Droon command formation in transit, as planned. The Droon turned to meet them rather than continue toward the homeworld, because the Droon were nothing if not systematic and they could not ignore a threat at their back. That was the trap. The moment they turned, they were no longer moving toward their objective. They were reacting, and reacting was not what they were built for. 4 human ships were destroyed. 11 more took serious damage. The Unyielding lost its port engine array in the 3rd exchange, and Vance fought the rest of the battle with a ship that could only turn in one direction without manual override. She turned it manually every time without stopping. When the Droon command fleet finally broke and began the long withdrawal, the space between them and the Vareth homeworld was clear. Rail contacted Hale an hour after the last Droon vessel disappeared from tracking range. He had been preparing something to say, something that acknowledged what had been done and what it meant. He had been composing it in his head for the past hour, and it kept getting longer, and none of it felt right. Hale's face appeared on the display. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship was lit in the quiet way it lit after a fight, systems on, work continuing, the particular low energy of a crew still moving but no longer afraid. Rail said, "I had a speech." "You don't need one," Hale said. A pause. "The archives," Hale said. "Don't forget our deal." Rail looked at him, and then, for the first time in a very long time, he made a sound that was the Vareth equivalent of a laugh. Not much, just a small exhale through his mandibles that carried something like disbelief and something like relief and something he could not name. "I will not forget," he said. Dara and Nora Vance stood at a wide viewport on the Vareth homeworld 2 weeks later. It was evening. The city glowed teal in the cliffs below them. The sky was the purple it always was at this hour, both moons up and pale. Vance had not been to a Vareth world before. She stood with her hands behind her back and looked at the city the way she looked at everything, quietly, completely, missing nothing. Dara said, "We helped you once because it was profitable. You helped us because it was right. I do not know how to repay that." Vance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You already did, you asked." Dara looked at her. "It takes more than most people know," Vance said simply, "to ask." Outside, the city lights held steady against the dark. The moons did not move. They stood there a while longer, the two of them, watching a world that was still there.